Good morning, or I guess good afternoon for those of you across the pond. Here in DC, it is in the morning. All right, just gonna let another minute to get everyone get on. How's everybody doing today? This conference has been amazing, huh? All right, gonna give another minute. All right, 3 minutes past the hour. I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I do have to end a bit early today, so I probably won't go for the full hour, but we'll see. I would love, obviously, for an active discussion if possible. Please chime in with questions. So I will jump right in. Hi, everybody. My name is Julianna Willems. My pronouns are she, her. I am from the Washington, D.C. area. Hi, Amber. I'm a certified trainer and behavior consultant. I run a small private company in Washington, D.C. called JW Dog Training and Behavior Consulting, and we help everything from puppies and to reactivity and aggression. So I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to watch this conference. You guys have been just amazing sharing your content and supporting one another in the discussions. It's been really incredible. So today I'm going to talk about something that is really important to me, that I really love, that I think is something that's really changed the way that I train. And so I'm really excited to share it with you all and see where the discussion goes. So I wanted to share errorless learning because about 6 years ago, probably, I kind of relearned about it, and it changed the way that I train. So I'm hoping that we can have a good discussion about it today, and perhaps somebody will take something away that will change the way that they train and they find it helpful as well. So I was trained with positive reinforcement training when I first got into dog training about 7-8 years ago now. So I was lucky that I jumped right into positive reinforcement and clicker training. Never with any aversives or anything like that. I didn't even have like a no or an ah in my repertoire. But when I took Dr. Susan Friedman's Living and Learning with Animals course, which I highly recommend, when I took her course about 5 years ago, probably, something really stuck out for me. And that was the concept of errorless learning. And so even though I was trained as a positive reinforcement trainer who uses clicker training and who doesn't use aversives, this concept of errorless learning was still new and different for me. And it really changed the way that I train. So hopefully today we'll be able to see why errors may or may not be important and how errors could potentially be impacting your training and your learning process. So I do want to clarify before I get started that when I say errorless, I fully understand that it's impossible to get a zero error training procedure. We're not robots, we're humans. So I really do mean minimal error learning. Minimal error is just a little bit more of a mouthful, so I'm going to be probably saying errorless most of the time. Sometimes minimal error, I might interchange them, but please know that when I say errorless learning, I'm not expecting us or learners to experience no errors in the learning process. I'm really saying minimal error, but again, a little bit more of a mouthful. So for today, I'm just going to mostly stick to errorless learning. So as a positive reinforcement, quote unquote, clicker trainer, somebody who uses clicker training in the training process, trains with positive reinforcement, I know and I think a lot of us, really enjoy watching our learners figure it out. We like seeing them try to figure out the game and think through problems. But the thing about needing to figure it out means that there is a question about what the right answer is. The learner, if they're having to figure it out, means that they don't necessarily understand or know what it is, what the right answer is. And so that is where kind of the trouble lies. And when I give this talk, or when I've given it before, and I have a visual, and I apologize, I am going to be mostly, pretty much not mostly, I am going to be just a talking head today. I don't have a presentation for you, but hopefully I'll entertain you enough and be able to convey the concepts that I need to. When I give this presentation with a visual, like a PowerPoint with it, I have a picture of a person, it's a little figurine, and he's standing in front of 3 arrows. So he has 3 different ways to go. And it's like, figure out which path to choose. And the thing is, he could figure out the right answer, but that still leaves 2 paths that would be the incorrect answer, the wrong answer. So that there's a lot of question there about what the right choice is, and there's a lot of room for mistakes and for errors. So looking at defining concepts, what is an error? So for the learner, an error is not getting the right answer and therefore not getting access to reinforcement. It could mean something as simple as no food, no click and treat for that response. It could also mean, some people use no reward markers, oops, or even worse, they might use a little bit of an correction if the dog gets the incorrect answer. And so I don't use, definitely, I think most of us aren't using any heavy corrections, no, verbal corrections, harsh verbal corrections, no leash corrections, anything like that if our dogs mess up. But I really hope that you take away from today that where errors can cause some problems in the training process, and errors paired with corrections for errors can really be much worse. So for today, I'm going to talk about, I'm going to have a mistake mean, an error mean that the animal simply does not get access to reinforcement. Again, people might handle errors differently, but for today, an error is simply going to mean that the animal does not get a click and a treat, does not get access to reinforcement. So as trainers who use positive reinforcement, we tend to think that mistakes in our learning process are benign because nothing bad happens to the animal. We don't use any positive punishment when they mess up. We don't make a big deal of it. We don't do anything. They just don't get the reinforcer. So we tend to think, no big deal. They're fine. It's not bad when they make a mistake. But is it? That's what we're going to explore today. So I'm going to do a quick exercise with you guys. If you want to participate, please participate at home. This is something that I saw Michelle Pouliot do at Clicker Expo when she did a talk on minimal error learning, and it really hit home for me. So those of you who are watching, feel free to again participate. So anybody who would like to, I would like you to raise your right hand. Not like that. Try again, not like that. Oh, that's not it either. Not that. No, not that either. Try again. So hard to know without seeing audience participation, of course, but I just told you 5 or 6 times that you didn't get the right answer. How many of you, when you were at home trying yourself, by the 3rd or 4th time started going, well, what do you want from me? Or maybe you're more patient than that. But I can tell you some learners, when I've tried this with humans, have gotten pretty exacerbated pretty quickly. And the thing is, I was being very kind in the way that I was telling you to keep trying. I wasn't saying that was wrong. I wasn't saying, no, that was bad. I was simply asking you to try again. And I told you didn't do a good job. So this is important because I really think, one, it's important to have empathy for our learners, that even if we're not being harsh in when they make a mistake, that mistakes are not fun. And also, I think it's important for us to realize just how many mistakes can happen if we're not clear with our training criteria or our training process. So, why are mistakes problematic? You just experienced it if you tried that exercise. For the learner, mistakes can cause, and very quickly do cause, frustration. Mistakes can cause a decrease in confidence. Mistakes can cause your learner to want to quit. Mistakes can cause learning and a training process to not be fun and to almost even become aversive for our animals. And that's really, really important to understand, because even though I was being kind and saying, oh, try again, by the third, fourth, fifth, sixth mistake, even though nothing bad was happening, it was still becoming quite frustrating. And my guess is, depending on who you are as a learner, you might have said, oh, screw this, I'm not going to try anymore. I'm not going to continue to participate. And from a teaching perspective, so from our end as the trainer, the teacher, our learners, when they make errors, make mistakes, they're practicing the unwanted behavior. They're practicing the behavior that we don't want to see more of. They're rehearsing an undesirable behavior, which, of course, in the training process is also something that we don't want. So from the learner perspective, errors cause a ton of frustration. And from the training perspective, errors cause our dogs to rehearse behaviors that we're not intending them to practice, to get better at. So let's take a look at the science, or some science that we have on it, I should say. Herbert Terrace did a study in 1963 on pigeons learning a new behavior. And that behavior was, they wanted to teach the pigeon, so it's a discrimination procedure. They wanted to teach the pigeons to touch a specific color. So they had, out of two colors, they had two procedures for this training process. One was a trial and error approach, and one was an errorless approach. So the trial and error approach, you had your color that produced reinforcement. This is the one, the pink one. Well, I don't know what color it was, but we'll say for today, pink is what earned them reinforcement. And the blue one was extinction. No reinforcement happened. We did not want them to peck the blue one. Reinforcement, extinction. Reinforcement, no reinforcement. So what they did for this procedure is they would show the pink one, the pigeons would peck it and they would get reinforcement. They would show the blue one, the pigeons would peck it and nothing would happen. Ultimately, the pigeons did learn to peck the pink one. But we'll talk about in a second kind of what ended up happening there. So an errorless approach, and for those of you who have worked on discrimination, probably have seen this happen, or seen this tactic used, where they presented the pink one. The pigeons got a strong reinforcement history for pecking the correct color, and then slowly they faded in the other color, and ultimately they ended up next to each other, but the pigeons were only pecking the correct pink color. So with the trial and error approach, remember, present the reinforcement, no reinforcement. Reinforcement, no reinforcement. The pigeons made between 2,000 and 5,000 errors. Again, they did ultimately learn to peck the correct color, but it took a lot of mistakes. And more important than that, it caused the pigeons to show aggressive behaviors in the presence of the extinction condition, the one that did not produce reinforcement. When they saw the blue, they would show aggression and frustration behaviors. And us is they started to have a negative conditioned emotional response to the blue, to the non-reinforcement producing stimuli. So again, they learned the correct behavior, but it had a lot of fallout. So with the errorless approach, again, they faded it in. The pigeons learned the correct behavior, 25 errors total, compared to 2,000 to 5,000. So just like night and day, right, in terms of errors. And in addition, the pigeons showed no aggression and no negative conditioned responses to the non-reinforcing producing stimuli. So for me, that study really hit home what I was starting to see anecdotally, or what I was seeing anecdotally when it came to errorless learning, that animals who do not experience errors in the training process are significantly less stressed and way quicker at acquiring and correctly doing the wanted and desirable behavior. Right, I'm just going to check in the chat real fast. Okay. All right, remember, if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat and we will talk about them. Okay, so I'm going to give you another example that is not dog related, and it's certainly not scientific, but my goodness, it's my own experience, and it, again, really hit home this point for me. So I moved into a new apartment about a year ago, and in our bathroom on the right side of the sink are 3 drawers, and one of those drawers includes the supplies that I need to brush my teeth at night. It has my toothpaste and my floss. And every single time I go to those drawers, I open the incorrect one first. I open it up, I see the Q-tips. Nothing bad happens. I just don't get access to what I was looking for. I don't get reinforced for opening that drawer because I'm not getting the supplies to brush my teeth. And so then I try again and I get to the correct drawer. But let me tell you, the frustration that builds over time as I open the incorrect drawer every single time, it is so enormously frustrating. I get to the point where I'm like slamming it shut. And every time I'm thinking to myself, okay, anyone who says mistakes are necessary to learn the correct behavior, that's no way. This is so frustrating. And I would say a year later, I might kind of be starting to get it, but I'm definitely opening the incorrect drawer pretty frequently still. It is not helping me understand how to open the correct drawer. So that is, again, it really hit home for me. I do not like mistakes in the learning process. Okay, so we've talked a lot about why mistakes are problematic, why errors do not lend themselves to our learners being low stress and learning things quickly and understanding what they're supposed to be doing and creating engaged learners. So what is an errorless approach? Now for me, I think it's more of a mindset, meaning I go into training sessions thinking, how can I set my environment and my training up so my learner has no choice but to be successful? And what that looks like is starting with the smallest success point and going from there. So remember that visual I told you about with the man with the 3 arrows, and he had 3 options. Well, an errorless approach would be that same visual, but with one option. So my learner, I'm starting with criteria that is so low that they have no choice but to get the right answer. Click, treat, go from there. And what this comes down to is observation and criteria setting. So we've all heard about splitting behaviors. That is one of the most important pieces to an errorless mindset, a minimal error approach. And that's because we need to be able to split criteria in a way that our animals are very quick to get the right answer, the right answer, the right answer, the right answer, and we don't lump criteria too much. That opens the opportunity for a learner to go a direction we didn't want them to go. So you really need to be smart about, or it takes being really smart about where you start your criteria. And what I've started to do when I approach a a training exercise now, as I'll usually always start with super, super low criteria, the smallest success point, and then very quickly work my way up to perhaps where I would have started initially, uh, you know, pre-errorless mindset, where I would have said, oh, they know this, I'm going to set my criteria up here and I'm going to wait for it. So now I'm like, oh, I'm going to give you this one and this one and this one and this one. Great. Now here we are where I want to get started, and we'll go from there. And what I've found is that this actually allows progress much quicker. This doesn't allow our learner to practice mistakes. And even though you might be spending 2 or 3 clicks kind of below your desirable criteria, meaning not at a point where you're hoping to be working or to be getting to, you get to that point much faster because you've given them a bunch of wins along the way. So I'm going to give a quick example here, and this is kind of just a vague example, but kind of how I used to teach a behavior to how I do now. So the example I'm going to use is teaching touch to a client dog. So touch, it's a targeting behavior. The dog touches their nose to your hand, and it's pretty easy. Pet dogs get it really quickly. So the way that I used to do this, I would usually teach it as the trainer. I'd pass it off to the humans, and I'd pretty quickly say to the humans, oh, let them figure it out. Just hold your hand there. They'll figure it out. And what would happen is the dogs would kind of be sitting there, and they'd be, the dog would be looking at me, the dog would be looking at the owner. And then we've got 2 options. The dog then might say, is this what you wanted? And they'd reach their nose out and touch the hand. Great. They've figured it out. Or what was happening more frequently was the dog would maybe start scratching, a little bit of displacement behavior, or the dog would offer a different behavior, a paw, something else that they thought might work. And what was happening was the dog was not enjoying the training process. But again, as a positive reinforcement trainer we were using clicker training, all I thought was, oh, just wait it out. They'll figure it out. And so we wouldn't do anything bad when they wouldn't get the right answer. We would just wait, and we would set our criteria up here, and we would wait for them to figure it out and meet it. And looking back, of course, it makes me cringe, but I think about the animals and the dogs, who's the species that I teach, the dogs that would be doing that, they wouldn't really be having fun. They wouldn't be getting a lot of wins. And the humans weren't seeing a lot of successes. So when I started to approach with a more minimal error mindset, instead of saying, hold your hand out, say touch, and wait, we would spend so much time. I was like, basically put your hand so close to their nose that they have no choice but to reach out and touch it. It's so close that of course they're going to come up and sniff it. And we'd spend a lot of time with it, so easy. And I think that I would have maybe thought, well, what are they learning? Of course they're going to touch the hand if it's right in front of their face, But again, if we look at it from kind of a rate of reinforcement standpoint, when we present the cue and wait it out and expect them to figure it out, you're getting maybe 1 or 2 reinforcements a minute. That rate of reinforcement is so not okay. But if we have more of an errorless mindset where you are setting up your repetitions and your criteria so your dog has no choice but to be successful, at that point you're getting 6, 10, more than that, clicks and treats per minute, and suddenly your rate of reinforcement has gone so far up, and your dog is thinking, wow, this is a lot of fun, this is really engaging for me, this is producing a lot of wins, I like this. So it's really important to think about that, obviously, in the training process, but it's really a place where I've seen a huge difference. So what I'm going to do now is talk through 3 scenarios that are often taught even in a positive reinforcement procedure with more of a trial and error mindset. and how then I actually approach it with more of an errorless mindset where I don't let the dog mess up. So the first one is teaching a dog to wait for the food bowl. We label it impulse control. We expect our dogs to keep, a typical behavior contingency is butt on the ground produces the food bowl closer to the ground or on the ground. And we say, oh, the dog has control over the food going to the ground because they know that if their hind end comes off the ground, the food bowl goes away. And it looks like this. You cue your dog to sit. You might give a wait cue. You start to put the bowl on the ground. The dog stands because they have a long learning history that food in a bowl means they can go eat it. And whoop, we take the food bowl away. So this is obviously also some negative punishment is at play here. It's not simply just doing nothing, but I think myself included, a lot of positive reinforcement trainers utilize negative punishment procedures with errors, and we think that it's not quite so bad. But what happens is then we go to try again. The dog doesn't understand, so they try to figure it out. They think, oh, okay, she didn't know what was happening the first time. She just took the bowl away. Let me go for it again. They pick their hind end off the ground, and we take it away again. And eventually they learn. When I gave this talk a few years ago, I used a video that I found on YouTube of, again, a positive reinforcement organization teaching a very, very sweet little golden retriever to wait for the food bowl. And it was really hard to watch because, again, they weren't giving an they weren't saying oops, they weren't doing anything. They were simply taking the bowl away when she went towards it. And it took like probably 20 repetitions, this poor dog. And by the end, she was throwing out like appeasing behaviors. Like she was going on her belly. She was trying her or on her back, exposing her belly with her tail a little tucked. And she was going onto her, she was trying her down and she was trying her sit. And she was so desperately saying, what am I supposed to be doing here? And that is not a learner that is happy or eager to figure out the right answer. She was a very I guess resilient learner. I mean, she tried really hard. She kept trying when I think a lot of other dogs would have just said, okay, I'm walking away. This is not fun for me anymore. She really kept trying, which was pretty amazing. But we shouldn't take advantage of that, our animals like desire to stay in the game even when it's not fun. I don't think, at least. I don't want my dog to be basically thinking, wow, this kind of stinks, but okay, I'll keep trying. I want my animal to have a much more clarity than that. So anyway, with this procedure, an alternative option for teaching something like waiting with the bowl, what would typically be a negative punishment procedure, is, again, behavior contingency is hind end on the ground produces bowl on the ground. So a way to do this from a more errorless mindset is the moment your dog is sitting and you bring out the bowl, rush it to the ground. So you just gave them no choice but to be successful, because the moment the bowl came out, it hit the ground. You didn't give them an opportunity to stand up. You started at a point where they were 99% likely to be successful. And from there, you might, okay, your dog's sitting, you might bring the bowl out, keep it there for 2 seconds. You're not even going closer to the ground yet, right? Because we want to make sure they can be successful. You rush it to the ground. Next time you bring the bowl out, you drop it 2 inches, rush it to the ground. Bring it out, drop it 6 inches, rush it to the ground. So we're slicing criteria much, much, much smaller points so that our dogs are getting the right answer almost without question. It's happening. Criteria is raising so quickly that they don't even think about making a different choice, because at that point you've gotten 3 or 4 repetitions of your dog being successful and you can just run with it. Versus if you had brought the bowl out, started to put it towards the floor, the dog brings their butt up, they practice the unwanted behavior, you take the bowl away, you start building frustration. It's just not necessary in the learning process. So That's a pretty common one where unfortunately we utilize a decent amount of frustration, but there's a great way to do it that doesn't have to involve frustration. Another training procedure that I'm going to talk about is uh, shaping. And so I think for a long time, clicker trainers, and I was trained this way too, thought that shaping required an extinction burst. And I think I'm happy to report that I think lately we've started to realize we actually don't need that frustration, that extinction burst. We don't need our animals to get so exacerbated that they try something that they, then they throw out something, a totally different behavior. No, instead, again, from an errorless perspective or an errorless mindset, we hone in our observation skills and we look for criteria that is so thinly sliced that we're slowly working towards the next behavior, the criteria closer to what we want, but in a way that our dogs aren't having to get frustrated. So that's where I've changed my shaping procedures is my rate of reinforcement stays much, much higher and I'm not leaving the door open for my animal to practice something that I don't want or to start to get frustrated. And if you're thinking to yourself, well, Juliana, this really just sounds like good training, I totally agree with you. I can't even wrap my head around the fact that I once kind of didn't approach training from this perspective and that I did a lot of waiting them out and I did a lot of figure it out with my animals, my learners. And I'm so grateful that I've learned kind of this new perspective and this new different way of doing things. And it's like I never looked back. I've been training this way for years now, but that's why I like to talk about it a lot because, again, even in positive reinforcement circles, we can inadvertently build a lot of frustration into our training in the name of figure it out, you know, we're not correcting when they mess up. We're not doing any positive punishment when they mess up. So it must be fine, but it ends up not being fine. So another procedure that is often trained with a trial and error approach is loose leash walking. And so where a lot of this stuff that I've talked about I really want to make sure that I protect the learner's mentality and frustration levels, of course. Loose leash walking, I feel like, is something where a more errorless approach is actually, I mean, it's always better for the training process, but is really where an errorless that helps the training go a lot faster, which again, it always makes the training go faster, but especially in loose leash walking, I don't think there's as much risk for frustration on the learner end as there is for just slow, not a lot of progress quickly training with loose leash walking from an trial and error standpoint. So with loose leash walking, a common procedure is dog gets reinforcement for a specific set of criteria. It's usually a loose leash, maybe walking on a specific side, whatever your criteria is. If they're in that position, they get good stuff. Might be access to moving forward. You might let them walk. You might be feeding. You might be verbal praising when they're in that position. And then if the dog hits the end of the leash, you stop and they don't get any reinforcement. They don't get to move forward. You wait for them to give a nice behavior and you keep going. So reinforcement for the right thing, no reinforcement for the wrong thing. And of course, this is important. We don't want our dogs to be reinforced for practicing an unwanted behavior. But if you go out with the plan of reinforce what you like and don't reinforce what you don't like, we leave the door open for the dog practicing that unwanted behavior. So an alternative procedure is, again, slicing your criteria so thinly that you are clicking and treating, you are reinforcing so frequently that your dog has no choice but to be successful. And that looks like finding the smallest success point, probably when you're standing still with a loose leash, click and treat. The moment you take off, click and treat again, again, again. So you are not opening the door for the dog practicing anything but that loose leash. And another part, of course, with an errorless mindset is setting the environment up so your dog is significantly more likely to be successful, which, as we know for loose leash walking, means practicing inside. But what I really embrace, especially with loose leash walking, is keeping my rate of reinforcement so high initially that our learner has no choice but to be successful. And that is where I think sometimes my procedures or some procedures can be different, because I'm not leaving the door open for the dog to hit the end of the leash. I mean, of course they do sometimes, of course. And that is huge, guys. I am not saying that our dogs will never make errors. I am not saying that we will never experience errors in training processes with our learners. That's certainly not what I'm saying. But I think with errorless learning, it's a mindset shift that the responsibility is put back on us as the trainer to set our animals and our learners up for success, instead of on the learner to figure it out. And so that's kind of where I will summarize and wrap up, is that it is really a mindset shift. It's, that saying, the rat is always right. This is where, again, errorless learning puts the responsibility back on us as the trainer, that it's not up to our animals to figure it out. It's not up to our learners to try to guess or trial and error what the right decision is. It's really up to us as the trainer to make our training and teaching so clear, and our conditions and our environment so well set up, that our animals have no choice but to be successful. And there's an interesting argument against errorless learning, or I should say a question people bring up is, well, then will that create a learner who just has no resilience for mistakes? The first time they make a mistake, are they going to quit? That has absolutely not been my experience. In fact, I think it's the other way around, that when they have such a strong reinforcement history with whatever behavior you're working on, or whatever animal you're working with, when you two have together, that when your learner messes up, they're almost like, that was weird. Shoot, okay. And then as you as the trainer, you quickly get in there and you say, okay, how can I give you a win as quickly as possible, and go from there. That's another thing about an errorless mindset, is that when mistakes do happen, it's up to us to make sure that we are kind of helping our animals recover as quickly as possible. And it's really critical that mistakes are, at least I feel like, that we don't let our dogs kind of fall down this path of, oh no, I'm not being correct. Oh no, I'm still not getting the right answer. I don't know how to get access to reinforcement. Okay, this isn't fun anymore. So what I typically will do is, an animal will make a mistake, and then I'll just pretty quickly redirect them to something that earns them reinforcement quickly. And then I'll think to myself, okay, how can I make it easier for them to get the right answer? Because finding a success point and going from there makes your training just so much faster and more enthusiastic. I found it's better, definitely better engagement across the board, and more precise, and my learners are happier. My human learners are happier because they're seeing success from their dog faster, and my human learners are learning how to seek out success points when they might not normally think about it. Another example, and it gets a little bit interesting for me, where it's like, I think it's just overall an errorless mindset, but it's just the mindset of capturing the smallest bit of good behavior that I like and going from there. I think it all stems from not wanting my animals to practice unwanted behavior, or to mess up, or to not know how to earn reinforcement. So this happens a lot, out in the world. Our animals are distracted. An average dog owner might ask their dog to look away from a distraction, come all the way over to them, and to sit for them. And as trainers, we know that there's a lot of steps there. And so a more errorless approach would say, well, let's make sure we reinforce them for just turning back, because that gets them a win really fast. It doesn't give them the opportunity to perhaps turn back, look away, disengage from us. We're giving them almost no chance but to be successful in that moment. So, just to recap, errors can be really frustrating for our learners. Errors can cause low confidence, they can cause low enthusiasm, and they can really cause our learners to want to quit. So I really encourage you, see how you can embrace a minimal error mindset. Build confidence in your learners, keep your rate of reinforcement high, um, create training scenarios that increase the chances your animals are successful and decrease the chances that they're going to get the wrong answer, and see how it builds success in your training. All right, I'm going to peek at the chat window real fast. So if you have any questions, please leave them. This is really a topic that I've seen big changes with in my training. So there's a question, Kate has a great question, that when it comes to leash walking, um, stopping on the lead and for pulling causes a lot of frustration. I totally agree. Even with a high rate of reinforcement, they do get to the end of the lead sometimes, of course. How would you approach that if stopping causes frustration but proceeding is reinforcing the pulling? So this is a really good question, and actually a great opportunity to kind of work through how to approach errors from a more errorless mindset. So what I would typically do with leash walking, so it's like reinforcement for being next to me, reinforcement for being next to me. The dog kind of travels off a little bit. Now, two things here. An errorless mindset for leash walking, I will actually click even if the dog is starting to leave, but before they hit the end of the leash. Because what I've done there is I know that if I waited 2 seconds longer, they will get the incorrect answer and hit the end of the leash. But I have a millisecond there where, yeah, they're not doing quite what I want by being right next to me, but they haven't messed up yet. So I will reinforce, I will try to get my marker in right before they hit the end of the leash. And what I've done is I've added reinforcement to the behavior of still having a loose leash. And I think that's where errorless mindset comes in too, is that it might not be the behavior we want, but it's heading in that direction. And that's really, really important. So then if the dog does hit the end of the leash, what I do there is I say, how quickly can I get you back to me and find a reinforceable behavior? So hopefully at that point too, your dog has a huge reinforcement history of being with you. They hit the end of the leash. An owner might be able to make a little positive interrupter noise, say the name, something, and as soon as that leash gets loose again, click treat. So anytime that the leash has been loose at all, the animal is gaining reinforcement. And what we'll do is we'll shape the behavior towards what we want, where, it's a few minutes cue. The animal is starting to get more in the direction of what we want. And I think that's really important too from an errorless approach, is that our criteria is not all the way up here all the time. Our criteria is so flexible, and because all we want is our dogs to be successful. And at the end of an hour with an owner, if our criteria is flexible based on what's going on, my criteria for the most part is walk on my right side, right next to me. But my criteria in the moment right after you pull is just loosen that leash a little bit. Let me click and treat that. So I think it is being really flexible in your criteria and really having that eye for wins and that are anywhere in the direction of what you're looking for. So Catherine had a great question. Any tips for coaching owners? This is really important, that owners also tend to, of course, have very high criteria for their animals. Just like the example of the dog's at the park and the owner wants Fluffy or the dog is on leash in a distracting environment like a park, and the owner wants Fluffy to turn away from the distractions, come over to the owner, sit down and look up at them. I mean, that sequence, there's so many behaviors there that are really challenging in a distracting environment, and more so that are really there's so many opportunities to reinforce there. And so for me, especially if it's a new dog where we're really having trouble building engagement or getting the behavior we want, which is disengage from distractions, I'm going to click and treat the moment they give me anything that looks like what I want. I'm not going to wait for them to give me the full behavior, because that's going to set them up to practice errors or to practice unwanted behavior of ignoring me or disengaging from me. I am going to say, I'm going to give you no choice but to be successful because I'm going to take an ear twitch. I'm going to take the head turn. I'm going to take anything that looks like you remembering that I exist. And so I think for owners, a lot of it is just education, right? And pointing out those success points and pointing out that good behavior and coaching owners and telling them, how can we get our dog successful more quickly? So I think it really is just an education and a practice thing, right? Just like for us trainers too, and helping our owners understand that they don't have to wait for the finished product. They can and they should be reinforcing along the way. And the great thing about it is the proof is in the pudding. The training speaks for itself. They start to see the dogs way more engaged because the dogs are getting way more wins. The dogs are having way more fun. The dogs are thinking to themselves, wow, finally it is worth it to pay attention to my human, because the human is just paying so much better than before when they were waiting for basically a behavior that the dog couldn't achieve. And I think that's a big thing. The errorless mindset is, instead of waiting for you to mess up or not be successful, I'm going to create an environment or have criteria where you have no chance but to be successful, and I'm going to reinforce you. So really, really great questions. Oh, Catherine, I'm sorry, I missed the second half of your question. So when they aren't skilled at training, really good point. I think this is where breaking down behaviors for our humans is really important as well. So instead of having your human juggle the treats and the clicker and maybe the leash or controlling their dog, what can you take off of their plate so all they have to worry about is looking for and marking desirable behavior? Maybe even just looking for, and maybe they say click and you can do the clicking and treating. What can we do to help our animal or our human learners be successful just like our animal learners? So thank you, everyone. I have to hop, but I really, really appreciate you being here and asking some great questions. And I really look forward to the rest of this conference. So thank you so much. You can find me on Instagram, JW Dog Training, on Facebook. My website's jwdogtraining.com. Julianna Willems. Love to connect with people on social media. So I hope to see you guys there. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful day.